Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from today. I'm Chris Fair, President of Resonance, based in Vancouver, and pleasure to have Thomas Ermacora with me today for this session on Second City Renaissances. Thomas joining us from Florence, Italy today. Thomas is a city futurist, a community architect, and expert in regenerative urbanism. And we're going to dive in to talk a little bit with Thomas about what he sees as not only the future for cities like Florence, but second cities around the world. Welcome, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Chris. It's a pleasure to be with you today. It's afternoon over here, so I hope it's not too early over there.
Well, that's one of the unique things about the World City Festival is that we're all in 24 different time zones. So for some of us, it's late, some of us, it's early, but it's always a good time to have a conversation and great to see you. Thanks for joining us at World City this year.
Great pleasure to come back.
So Thomas, tell me a little bit about, you moved to Florence just really prior to the pandemic. And obviously everyone knows Florence, Italy is the cradle of the Renaissance, and it's about 2,000 years of history. But, as you kind of first arrived and moved to Florence, what was the landscape like, and why did you choose Florence? And what were some of the challenges and opportunities you saw for a city with so much history?
Well, I think it's important for me to put a context for our audience, which is that I was living in the UK. I've always been a bit of a global nomad. And as a half Italian who had never lived in Italy, I felt that there was an opportunity with Brexit to take the ferry away and go and explore Italy. So I also had the intention to set up a climate-focused think tank in a city where there would be the tourism appeal, so that people would travel from around the world and discuss complex issues around cities and the climate in new ways. So I was looking for, let's say, a magnetic city, and Florence definitely felt like a magnetic city. I'm myself more from the area of Venice, where my father came from. But I have to say that Florence is incredibly central in Italy. It's, in the 10 top cities, but it's not a big city. It's also not a small city. So it has the mix of, let's say, international appeal, local and regional stardom, you could say, and a really interesting urban fabric, which has been, because of the cultural heritage, less touched, of course, in other places, not destroyed by wars as much, but overall also a very special integration of the natural landscape into the center of a city. And I think that really was the special thing for me. I've always tried to find a way to live in a city and live in the countryside, and there's actually probably no place like Florence to do those two things at once. Many reasons why I moved to Florence, basically, but I have to say that I find Florence has something very unique, not just to attract people and have a nice time, but also to study this relationship between man and nature, which is so fragile today. And really, I think we can learn a lot from what the ancients did. Of course, they didn't have the problem of creating massive suburbia, and they didn't have cars that would, drive us away from the center that quickly. So, in a way, they didn't have the same urbanistic challenges. But I do think that the relative, let's say, underweight of industry in Florence and overweight of history and culture has preserved a very healthy balance between nature and the city. And not only for my own family's quality of life, I think we can learn from how to do that in more places.
So that access to nature and that blend between the rural and the urban was probably, obviously advantageous over the last, 18 months as people in large cities were struggling to find green space, access to nature. I mean, do you see that as a model that we kind of look to for cities, moving forward as we think about not just trying to bring nature into our cities, but what is that permeability between the urban and the rural?
Well, I think you just said it beautifully. It's that permeability. It's the permission to feel urban and the permission to feel rural at the same time. I think as humans, we we do strive for culture and civilization, and it's hard to ignore that we're attracted to cities not only because there are jobs and bars and clubs. We're gregarian, so or gregarious rather. So we like to get together, but there is this need for nature, and COVID has of course augmented that a lot and made a lot of cities unattractive and disrupted their livability completely. So as we struggle to design walkable cities, and there's such a focus on that. I used to be closely involved with Jan Gehl and their studio, and sort of bringing to the world this sort of Danish cycling and pedestrian model. And so it's been almost 2 decades that I've been interested in seeing how that could be more spread into the world. But with regenerative urbanism sort of becoming the sort of next stage of urbanism, where it's more than sustainability, more than resilience, we need to actually use our cities to recreate the relationship and the balance with nature and people. And so I definitely think that there is something very special in observing the success of that relationship between the built environment and the natural environment. And if one could spread that in more places, I definitely think that just like we've learned about walkability being something special. By the way, Jan Gehl, he went to Siena, and that's what really motivated him to bring that model to Copenhagen. I don't know if people remember this, but he was fascinated by Siena, and he actually went back to Copenhagen with his wife and was looking around, and he thought, wait, where are the people sitting down? There are no benches. And if I go into the town hall, there's no data about them. So how do I learn about, people in the city? There was no information. So you literally started to count people. And this brought about a movement, of course, in urban design, which is very significant today. And I think that we're going to see something similar vis-a-vis, the way we need to create a better data architecture for understanding the meta between urban and rural. So yes, we all live in a city because we're digitally connected, but what does it mean to live in nature while you're living in a city? That's not very well documented. It's not very well understood. It's not very well understood how we create that, other than public parks, or safe zones for nature. So I think the way that the urban fabric has managed to cohese, integrate, facilitate, continue and build legacy around that relationship of man and nature, I think is something we need to study and learn from a lot. And Florence is an exemplar.
Does Florence have somewhat of an advantage as a historic city, founded more than 2,000 years ago? Do you think about Florence as being designed pre-automobile, obviously, and struggled to accommodate cars to the point of eventually banning cars from the downtown center? I mean, in some ways, does this give Florence an advantage to think about what the post-pandemic city looks like in terms of walkability, expanding the public realm? What are those kind of key issues or opportunities for a historic city like Florence?
I think you're spot on. I mean, in a way, it's an ironic thing in history, right? I mean, Bob Moses couldn't come out here, and Robert Moses, couldn't come out here and build highways, freeways, etc. You can't do that to an Italian city. So a bit like in Africa, they never built landlines, but now they've got 5G. I think in a way, many cities that were designed in a human scale, pre-car urbanism, pre-industrial urbanism, to simplify it, they have a better fabric to relate and equate a sensible relationship between nature and mankind's activities. So it's a hidden advantage, or it was a hidden advantage, but now it's a tremendous advantage in quality of life. And over time, I think it will be a very significant attraction point. It may be that Florence is a particular case because of special beauty, and it hasn't been corrupted, you could say, by modern urbanism and suburbia, etc. But overall, Italy and many European cities have that historical impediment to car-centric design, which has given them an advantage to human scale and natural urbanism.
You talked a little bit when in the very beginning about why you moved to Florence and sort of just this idea about a city that was maybe just right in terms of the size of having internationally connected, people well aware of the city, but not so large. We've spent a lot of time over the last couple of days at World City talking to on stages in the Londons and the Dubais and the New Yorks, and certainly these so-called superstar cities were the hardest hit over the last 18 months, during the pandemic. What's your view of sort of second cities or this million metropole? Is that the right size? Are they going to be more opportunistic? Are more people like yourself going to move from the Londons to million size metropoles? What's your view on the future of kind of second cities?
Well, I have to confess it's a luxury to live in Florence, so I don't suspect that, we need to take this with a grain of salt in the sense that it is not yet available for everyone to enjoy this quality of life. However, if you look at the smaller cities, in Italy, they have a very high standard of living. The life expectancy in Italy is higher than anywhere else in most of the world. And, there must be a reason. And it's not only the coffee and the pasta. And so it's probably in the quality of community. And in order to foster a great community, you need cities that work for people. And so I think, in that sense, cities that work for people have a scale that is, walkable and a closer relation to nature, and probably also historical heritage and a sense of generational legacies that is a bit more ingrained in the way that they think about how to design their tomorrow. It's never a tabula rasa, way of doing it. It's not, a new city. It's not. So I think there's definitely some benefits to that I inherit. So to go back to my point, yes, I'm living in an advantageous place because of it's Florence. I had the possibility to do it, and I had a project here that I wanted to bring, to Florence in Italy. But I think that if we think about the million, let's say between 300 and 1,000 and million cities, so metropolitan area of maybe 1 million, main city of about 300,000, you have in Italy roughly 20 cities of that scale. You've got about 20 countries in Europe who have about, another. So there's probably 300-400 cities in Europe of that size, but there's in the world, roughly a couple thousand that are in that category, that have enough history, that have enough qualities, etc. But they have been traditionally struggling in the competition for jobs. They lacked attractivity. They lacked the volume and the scale to have economies of scale to build the infrastructure for modernization, industrialization, etc., etc. So one could say the fifth or fourth industrial revolution, depending on how one looks at it and where one finds oneself in it. In a way, these cities are naturally in a better position to leapfrog, one. And number two, they also benefit from some of those things that are normally extremely expensive and that are associated with social status and wealth in most megacities. In New York, if you want to have a little garden, we know what that costs. Too much, is basically the word for it.
Right.
And if I look at some of my neighbors here, I have some neighbors who are farmers right next to me, and I'm inside a city. I'm inside the city walls of Florence, and they probably have a salary somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 euro a month, which is really quite low. And sometimes their wife doesn't work and they have kids, so they have to make do with that. And of course, Italy is more of a socialist country perhaps than some of the Americas and the rest of the world, so there's a safety net. But if you think of that, they have a house, they have a garden. That quality of life would cost you at least 3 times more in a big city in Italy, in Europe, and probably more in cities like Tokyo, New York, Paris, etc. So I think it bodes well. And this is really what I'm trying to say. I find there's a certain hidden optimism in the second and third tier city, which is that it can afford a necessary quality of life and so a decent life to people who can now participate in the global economy through digital infrastructures. And on top of that, it can be places where through new technology platforms and participatory practices, I wrote, I suppose, one of the main manuals of that called the Recoded City, Co-Creating Futures for Routledge in 2016 on the back of my organization Clear Village, which was doing community work a bit around the world. And really, I think that it's a special opportunity for participatory citizenship to emerge in these places where you're closer to your neighbors, and therefore it's easier to give meaning to participatory projects. And without the big budget master plans that you see pop up in mega cities, you can do quite a bit. And so this kind of participatory, regenerative culture, I think, is easier to establish in these second and third tier cities than it is in a megalopolis where you're anonymous. So I guess this was not very structured as a share. There's lots of different points there that are entangled, but basically it's a message of hope. It's a message of hope that, as we exit COVID and we enter, a new industrial age in terms of digital infrastructure, not going to talk about 5G, but just to say that there is an extraordinary opportunity to lift the economy of these second and third tier places quite rapidly by putting them onto the global network in all the ways we know possible. And at the same time, cultivate that extraordinary heritage that they have, which is a human scale urbanism, and that is closer to nature.
I'm glad you brought up thinking about the participatory aspect of what role the citizen plays in shaping the city. And I know you've done a lot of work around that. It strikes me that thinking about the effect of the pandemic for most of us, or most people that live in cities, I think the city was really imposed upon the citizens, and we were forced to adapt to whatever regime was put upon us within the city. But I think what was interesting over the last 18 months that we've seen really citizens take control of their cities and communities in so many different ways, and from tactical urbanism types interventions, just literally trying to rapid prototyping the urban landscape around them to adapt to the circumstances that we were in. I mean, do you think in some ways that citizens maybe now, smaller cities, second-tier cities, the citizens have always been more connected or felt more empowered to shape the city, but in a post-COVID reality, do you think this has maybe been a galvanizing event to get citizens to participate more in shaping the city?
I definitely agree with you. And again, this is, I like to be an optimist out of choice, because I think being a pessimist brings, little return on your mood and on how you impact the world. But, so I would call it a structural optimist. But the thing is that, yes, I definitely believe, as we are soon going to see COP26 probably fall apart, and we see, a very low degree of trust in major institutions, and we see our news, being corrupted in every single way possible and used in the wrong ways to undermine democracy, etc. When we have these things as being so present in our mind, I think we retrench to some things that are more local. So COVID has, of course, and we've seen the statistics, you get closer to your friends, you get closer to your family, you get closer to your inner quests. And in doing so, you ask yourself questions that are localistic. What is my role where I am? Where do I belong? Those are daily questions, not the question you ask yourself at the end of a commute week in New York. So I think that has accelerated the depth of localism. And at the same time, technology is making, we're more habituated. So we've had more technology literacy for participation, and there are more technologies that are, mature for decision-making, participatory decision-making. There's also the metaverse, which is, coming fast into that space in order to really engage citizens in new dynamic ways, that are more visual and sensorial and experiential, etc. So all these things put together, I think, are a good cocktail to magnify the opportunity opportunities of participatory placemaking. I'm part of a number of different groups and projects and think tanks, et cetera, that have thought about this for a long time, even back 20 years ago with the Global Eco-Village Network. And I can see this, that there's a bubbling of, smaller communities. So sometimes it's urban villages, sometimes it's rural villages, sometimes it's, smaller cities that, understand their neighborhoods better. So I do think that it's not at the scale of a full city, it's more neighborhood-based or village-based. But I definitely think that overall, the call it index of participation propensity, if one could ever make one, has grown significantly. And as we are less in a strong belief that things will come from above and go well, take your destiny in your own hands kind of way, I definitely think that this, what you mentioned, the rapid prototyping DIY culture, which again I have been very involved in with the Fab City movement I was part of shaping. And so this is a great moment for these things to find their, I would say, total relevance in the systemic questions we're facing and the existential questions we're facing.
I couldn't agree with you more about being an optimist, maybe to a fault, but I am optimistic. And one of the observations I've had as it relates to that participatory aspect of engagement with the public is that in some ways, over the last 18 months when we couldn't get together in person, I think the level of participation and public engagement has actually gone up. And that's for so often, it was really assumed that public engagement meant in-person meetings, whether those are open houses or council meetings, et cetera, which were limited to those people that, had the time and transportation to access those forums, versus now in a time when suddenly everything was digital. We already had these tools prior to COVID, but now it's actually broadened the breadth of the people that are participating in the process. And it's not being as directed by sort of a vocal minority or those that tend to have a resistance to change. So I am optimistic that this is not only galvanized people to participate, but that we've experimented and taught each other how to use all these new technologies, that the level of actual participation will also go up just based on the tools we now have in front of us.
And indirectly the quality, which is really what was missing. When I started writing my book in 2012, roughly, the idea behind recoding the city was purely this idea that the city had bugs, because urbanism was a new thing as a collective endeavor. And so open sourcing it is kind of where I was hoping we could go through technology, but also human skills and social skills, and the awareness that it's needed now as a sort of Anthropocene falls upon us. But basically, I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm excited about the quality of participation that we might see, and what it might do. And artificial intelligence, is a difficult question here, but I think big data and artificial intelligence will be very, very important tools to help citizens very, very soon. And as soon as we feel safer, let's say, if it's possible, let's bet that things are going to improve, and that privacy rules improve, and that trust in platforms improves, etc. Then I definitely think that the partnership between the collective of humans and the collective of data intelligence will unleash a new age, a renaissance in regenerative urbanism that we've never seen before, and that will level upwards lots of places that have been a bit forgotten, lost. And so it's not just because they're going to have the possibility to work online and trade crypto. It's because they're going to be able to leverage the global intelligence to treat local issues, and that's fantastic.
Yeah, let's hope so. As I think about the future, often counsel people as a futurist that, we tend to overestimate the impact of change and what we see happening around us. If you think about the automobile in the 1920s and the speculation that that caused, or the internet in the 1990s. But we tend to really underestimate the long-term change or implications of these things. As a city futurist, what do you see as, what are we underestimating, right now, as we're talking about remote work, the rise of, of second cities, the fall of first tier cities, all of these things, there's a lot of noise. But as you try and kind of look through that as a city futurist, what would be the 2 or 3 things that you think really that we'll be talking about 10, 20 years from now that, hey, these were the real undercurrents of change that were happening that had a long lasting effect on our cities?
Well, thank you. I mean, again, I will. I prefer to prepare for tomorrow than to give prognosis, but I will try and fall in line with your question. But indeed, there are a few things, and I want to pat myself on the back for, I think, having had a good hunch a few times around, aspects of livability, walkability, being so central to, call it, a different version of sustainability and resilience, and that it's not only because buildings are built with green technologies and clean tech, and that we have data architectures that make us save energy, that our cities will be greener. I think that it's going to be very much the both, and perhaps more importantly, the fact that we engineer cities to be more responsible in terms of energy consumption and etc., and circularizing them from within rather than through over-productization. And so I think that's something is really on my mind, is the fact that the citizen layer is being underestimated for its role and responsibility and capacity. So I think it's just echoing again what I was just sharing here in relationship to the regenerative urbanism movement. I do have a strong belief that, nearing the 8 billion, half of them able to participate within a decade in things such as these, so take, 4 or 5 billion people who can, not that they will, but who can have some say in the change of the places where they live in. That is an unprecedented thing, and to be taken very seriously by, I think, local authorities in terms of letting go of certain competencies. So just like we've seen regionalization over time, where there's the federal or national government and you pass it down to the regional and the local. So the authorities were passed down. I think the local authorities need to pass one further down, or many, and that's something that needs to be architected carefully, because that's how you unleash the potential. So the biggest barrier for me to progress in cities is very often the relationship between the administrative layer and the planning complexity, and then the citizen quality engagement and the curation of such. So that's kind of one big thing. So I guess I'm just repeating myself here that I have a strong belief that the citizen layer is underestimated, and it's a tidal wave that I believe in. The second thing that I really believe in, obviously, is the role of technology as an exponentializer of capacity, and with a careful, this needs to be done with care, and appropriate technology needs to be vetted, thought through, data needs to be treated responsibly, etc. And I'm not saying this lightly, but what I mean is that I think we shouldn't, let's say, fall into an excessive polarization between techno-skeptics and techno-optimists, because I think that's a big failure and a loss to what we're traversing collectively. And we need to really think carefully about that. And if we underestimate the tension and polarization in this space, I think we stand to lose a lot. And that concerns me. Probably that's where I'm less optimistic. So the last point I would make, that is very high in my mind, is nature inspired design. So biomimicry at all levels, all the way to urbanism. So I'm an associate in an organization which is preparing a sort of urbanistic revolution, and I prefer to withdraw the name of it right now, because I think there are many people working in that direction, and I'm not trying to promote it. What I think is important is purely the fact that This is happening. So again, through the possibilities of technology. So when Frank Gehry, that I worked with on the master plan many years ago, the first eco master plan in Europe, when he decided to do the Guggenheim, it was really through computer assisted design that he could do complex forms, and so rethink the way that materials worked. And I think that we're now at a new stage where we can think at the scale of a city and even planetary with computational intelligence. Again, carefully, let's not go too fast and recklessly and not over-productize. But I definitely think we need to not underestimate this biomimicry or nature-inspired design that is computationally activated and capacitated, because that's where I think cities, currently being designed are rapidly going to be obsolete boxes. And we see many, new cities that are being designed by big studios. I'm not going to name any, and they promise, to be the greenest and the more eco and whatever. But I actually think that they're failing to see what they really should be trying to do, which is to reinvent urbanism itself. How do we live on the planet in a much more integrated way? So what is the next version of Florence? Florence achieved a maximal relationship between man and nature 500 years ago. What does it look like today? And I think Florence could be a stage for this question mark, not for it to be the stage where it's built. But I'm preparing a festival here, which was presented to the mayor a few days ago. And really, I would like people to think about this renaissance in urbanism that's necessary. And these three questions I've mentioned, let's say concerns and aspirations that I have for future urbanism, I think can be translated into that. Let's not miss the opportunity that we have, that technology affords us. And let's also be respectful of humans as we do so.
Great. Well, I really appreciate you joining us today. And it's interesting to think about how these key themes around the role the citizen plays, the role technology plays, the role nature plays in shaping a new vision of urbanism and how that might unfold in Florence. I'll be curious to see how that comes together, and would love to participate in your festival in the future. We look forward to hearing more about that soon. It sounds like an exciting opportunity to bring all of these ideas together.
Wonderful. I'm very excited by you saying that. I would love for you to join and come here and present. You've worked on these questions all around the world. I really value your work and contribution. I'm so grateful that you're doing this extraordinary event that brings people around the world. And I would love to continue to support it in any way I can. So thank you for inviting me, Chris, and thank you to the audience for your curiosity and patience.
Great, really appreciate you joining us, Thomas, and I hope we'll see you next year at World City, somewhere in the world, in person this time.
In person would be great. I'll give you a virtual hug.
Thanks
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.